Buckingham Palace on a late night. No noise, no camera flashes, only a heavy silence covering the familiar corridors of power. Yet within that silence, a decision was made. A decision that shook the inner circle of the royal family and sent shockwaves across the world. King Charles III, the man who once sacrificed reputation and personal standing to protect his love for Camilla, now became the one who ordered her to leave the palace. There was no public explanation, no official statement, only a closed door and a very clear, unspoken message. The cause was not old romantic scandals that history has repeated countless times. The core of the matter lay in a far more serious suspicion, a plot directly linked to the sacred legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, assets valued not only in money, but in symbols, tradition, and the integrity of the monarchy. According to internal sources, an underground plan to shift control and benefit from this legacy was discovered. The first person to notice the irregular signs was Princess Anne, a figure known for her toughness and absolute loyalty to her mother legacy. From that discovery, events moved quickly, yet discreetly. Private exchanges, documents reviewed again, and finally the decision of the king, a cold but decisive decision, ending all possibilities of compromise. The question is, did Camilla truly cross an unforgivable line driven by ambition to protect the Parker Bowles family, or was she merely a piece in a much larger power game? Which side are you on? Comment number 1 if you support the decision of King Charles, or number 2 if you believe Camilla deserves sympathy. But to understand why everything reached this point, we need to return to the beginning. A morning that seemed peaceful at Buckingham Palace, where everything began. That morning began like any other in the dense work schedule of King Charles III. There were no warning signs suggesting he was about to face one of the greatest shocks since ascending the throne. A file was delivered from the private office of Queen Camilla. According to the attached note, it was merely a summary of assets requiring review under internal procedures. An administrative routine that seemed familiar, but from the very first pages, Charles sensed something was wrong. The first item that made him pause was a collection of diamond jewelry once under the direct management of Queen Elizabeth II. Not personal pieces, but collections tied to state ceremonies, coronations, historic overseas visits. The estimated value was clearly stated. About £500 million sterling. What chilled Charles was not the number, but the note beside it: status of reallocation of management rights. Transfer to a newly established private fund. With no line of approval from the king, the next page was even more serious. A portion of land within the Balmoral estate. A place of deep meaning to the royal family for generations, not merely real estate. It was one of the rare private sanctuaries. The place where Queen Elizabeth II took her final breath. The file stated an estimated value of about £200 million sterling. Along with a proposal to convert ownership into a long-term trust structure, the ultimate beneficiary was recorded through a complex legal framework. But when Charles' financial advisors decoded it, the name Parker Bowles appeared clearly. Charles no longer skimmed the pages. He read every line, slowly, carefully, as if fearing that missing a single detail would mean deceiving himself. Then came the third category. A collection of 18th-century porcelain, items long regarded as unofficial national property, preserved in the royal archives for hundreds of years. The estimated market value was about £18 million sterling, but the symbolic value was beyond measure. In the file, these items were listed as transferable assets, requiring no approval at the highest level. When the figures were added together, a summary line appeared at the end of the document. The total value of the reallocated legacy reached £1.2 billion sterling, equivalent to about $1.5 billion US. What Charles could not believe was that the entire process carried none of his signatures. No confirmation marks, no official minutes from the Privy Council. This was no administrative error. This was a deliberate act. Charles closed the file. In that rare moment, he did not think of the media. He did not think of public opinion. He thought of his mother. Queen Elizabeth II, and the words she had repeated in private conversations: "Protect the legacy. It is the soul of the dynasty." A legacy is not meant to be divided, not meant to become a tool to secure any family, even the closest ones. Legal advisors were summoned the same day. The review was conducted discreetly. Every signature, every seal, every date of issuance. The preliminary conclusion made the atmosphere in the room heavy. These documents had been drafted from Camilla office, based on a chain of internal proposals, and had moved dangerously close to final execution. If Charles had not personally examined them, if the file had been processed as a routine procedure, the consequences would have been irreversible. What caused the king the deepest pain was not only the risk of losing assets, it was the feeling of betrayal. Camilla was not a stranger within the palace. She understood better than anyone the fragile boundary between personal property and national legacy. She understood that what Elizabeth II left behind was not for a single generation, but for the entire dynasty and for the nation. From the initial suspicion, Charles decided not to go through intermediaries, not to let advisors speak on his behalf. He wanted to hear directly, to look straight at the woman for whom he once defied everything to marry. The confrontation was arranged quickly, discreetly, no minutes recorded, no outsiders present. But what Camilla said during that exchange eased nothing. On the contrary, it made everything worse. From that moment, Charles understood that this was no longer a misunderstanding that could be resolved through internal dialogue. This was a deep crack in the foundation of trust, and its consequences would go far beyond what the public could imagine. The first confrontation took place at Clarence House. There was no ceremony, no advisors or secretaries present, only King Charles III and Queen Camilla, two people bound together for decades. Yet on that morning the distance between them had never been greater. Charles brought the file with him. He did not hide it. He did not circle around the issue. He placed it on the table and stated plainly that he needed an explanation, not as a husband, but as the heir to the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. Camilla listened. She did not appear panicked. She did not react harshly. Her calm demeanor only heightened Charles' unease. When he pointed out each item: diamond jewelry, Balmoral land, 18th century porcelain. Camilla Seahilled. Then she said something that seemed harmless, that she was only trying to ease his workload, that the proposals were meant to serve environmental charity projects, a field to which Charles had always devoted his heart. According to Camilla, the reallocation was merely a technical step, a more efficient way to use assets no longer frequently displayed. But Charles was not convinced. He interrupted her. His voice was not raised. Yet it was firmer than any public statement he had ever made. He said that this was his mother legacy, not old property to be sold or transformed at will. Those assets did not belong to him personally, and certainly did not belong to any private fund. Even under a charitable label, they were the soul of the dynasty. The very things Elizabeth II had spent her life protecting. Camilla responded with weariness. She spoke of years under pressure, 30 consecutive years being viewed by the public as a destroyer. From the 1990s until today, she had always lived as the third figure in the story of Charles and Diana, always associated with the image of an intruder, the one who broke a royal marriage admired by the world. Camilla said she had paid enough. She believed she deserved trust, at least from the man who had chosen her as his wife. Charles remained silent as he listened. He understood the wounds Camilla had endured. He had witnessed her being attacked by public opinion for decades. But personal sympathy could not erase a matter of principle. He emphasized that no one, even his wife, had the right to interfere with what Queen Elizabeth II left behind without formal approval. What made the dialogue even more tense was when Charles asked Camilla to explain the legal structure of the related funds. She replied that everything was designed to ensure flexibility, that the final beneficiaries were never clearly specified. But Charles' advisors had seen the opposite. The names, the connections, all led in one direction: the Parker Bowles family. Camilla denied any intention of appropriation. She said it was only a way to secure the future for her relatives in case of upheaval, a preventive preparation. But it was at that moment that Charles recognized the fundamental difference in how they viewed the legacy. To Camilla, it could be a resource to manage and restructure. To Charles, it was an inviolable boundary. The confrontation ended without agreement. No clear apology. No commitment to stop. Charles left Clarence House with a heavy heart. He did not make an immediate decision. But he knew this issue could not be resolved by personal trust alone. And it could not be buried like old scandals once handled in silence. While Charles was still weighing his next move, someone else had begun asking questions much earlier. Princess Anne, the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, the one who understood every detail of the royal legacy structure, Anne was not easily misled by emotional justifications. She looked at the files, looked at the chains of proposals, and saw a familiar pattern, a systematically constructed plan. Not a spontaneous act. Anne began demanding a review of asset-related decisions from the time Elizabeth II was still alive. She questioned the role of the Camilla office in those proposals. And the deeper she went, the clearer the suspicions became. Not everything began after Charles ascended the throne. Some seeds had been planted earlier, quietly, patiently, and concealed beneath the familiar gentle exterior of Camilla. This was precisely what made Charles unable to continue treating the matter as a personal misunderstanding. Behind the gentle smile and the language of charity, there could be a far larger plan. A plan that, if not stopped in time, would shake the moral foundation of the entire monarchy. And in that silent chess game, the one person who never let her guard down was Princess Anne. The final pieces only truly came into view after Princess Anne demanded an expansion of the review scope. She did not limit it to asset transfer files. She requested an examination of private meetings recorded in the work calendar of Camilla office. Within that list, one name appeared with notable frequency: Annabel Elliot, Camilla's sister, an interior designer with long-standing experience in renovating properties tied to royal and aristocratic symbolism. According to internal records, a discreet meeting between Camilla and Annabel had taken place months earlier at a location outside the palace. No royal aides present. No official minutes. But technical documents sent afterward inadvertently revealed the true substance of the discussion. It was not about environmental charity, as Camilla had told Charles. It was a carefully calculated commercial investment plan. This plan centered on the creation of a chain of 8 luxury resorts, spread across Wiltshire and Scotland, regions closely linked to royal heritage and carrying exceptional brand value. Financial projections showed that after 5 years of operation, the resort chain could generate profits of around £300 million per year. This figure was not speculative. It was based on business models Annabel Elliot had previously applied successfully to other royal lodging projects. The allocation of roles was laid out with clarity. Annabel would oversee design and renovation, leveraging her expertise in blending heritage elements with modern amenities. Tom Parker Bowles was expected to handle the culinary segment, developing fine dining restaurants associated with royal imagery but operating fully on a commercial basis. Laura Lopes was mentioned as an artistic advisor, responsible for exhibitions and cultural events to elevate the brand value of the resorts. What stood out most was the source of initial capital. According to documents accessed by Anne Team, the funding was not to come from standard commercial loans, nor from independent investment funds. It was intended to be generated through the sale and conversion of portions of royal heritage, including jewelry, land, and historically valuable collections, the very assets that had appeared in the file Charles discovered. Following the projected flow of funds, financial experts identified a far more complex structure. Instead of allowing capital to flow directly into entities based in Britain, the plan utilized shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. These offshore entities were designed to receive proceeds from asset transfers and then reinvest them as foreign capital, a familiar method to reduce tax obligations and obscure audit trails. According to preliminary assessments, if this plan had been fully implemented, the flow of money could have been almost entirely hidden from routine oversight, not only avoiding taxes but also making it extremely difficult to establish a direct link between royal heritage and commercial ventures. This was no longer a matter of asset management. It was a risk of distorting the boundary between national property and family interests. Princess Anne recognized the gravity of the situation immediately. She understood that if these documents were leaked to the public, the consequences would not stop at a personal scandal. They could shatter the already fragile trust of the people in the monarchy and completely overshadow the legacy Queen Elizabeth II had spent a lifetime building. Anne acted like a true investigator. She demanded cross-checks of schedules, reviewed internal emails, examined memoranda never submitted to the Privy Council. Every minor detail was placed under scrutiny. She was not seeking emotional confrontation. She was seeking evidence. And the deeper she dug, the clearer the picture became. Some documents showed that preparations had begun before Elizabeth II passed away. Legal frameworks had already been outlined, waiting only for the right moment to be activated. Charles' accession was viewed as a convenient transitional phase, when the system was still stabilizing, when personal trust between the king and his wife could be leveraged. For Anne, this went far beyond acceptable limits. She did not see it as an effort to secure financial safety for Camilla family. She saw it as a direct violation of the sacred promise Elizabeth II had left to her children, that the legacy belonged to no individual, no matter their position within the royal family. These findings were presented by Anne to Charles with care. No sensationalism, no emotion, only facts, numbers, flow charts of money. Charles needed no further persuasion. What he had once suspected now had a clear shape. And the most painful part was that it came from the person he trusted the most. From that moment, the story was no longer a family dispute. It became a crisis of principle, of boundaries of power, of responsibility to protect a legacy against very ordinary temptations. Fortunately for the monarchy, Anne did not choose silence. She acted in time, like a loyal guardian of the legacy. Before everything went too far and became impossible to repair, after the first documents were clarified, Princess Anne understood that time was not on her side. What she was seeing were no longer scattered hypotheses. It was an operating network. Someone responsible for design, someone preparing legal structures, someone ready to activate the flow of money. And if action was not taken immediately, everything could disappear in silence. Anne decided not to go through normal administrative channels. She needed direct evidence. Evidence that could not be denied. The person Anne trusted with the task was Edward, a discreet figure, rarely appearing before the public. But with deep knowledge of internal digital and financial systems, Edward did not act loudly. He left no obvious traces. His first step was to access communication accounts used by the Camilla office and those closest to it. Emails that appeared to concern only schedules and interior design. When closely analyzed, contained sophisticated coded signals and financial instructions. At the same time, Edward monitored trial transactions, small sums transferred through multiple layers of intermediary accounts, from Britain to entities based in the Cayman Islands, then returning as foreign investment capital. These were probing moves, designed to test whether the system would be detected, and they occurred regularly, with planning, not by chance. Within 7 days, Edward had collected hundreds of emails, transaction records, attached documents, and benefit allocation diagrams. Each piece reinforced a single conclusion. The royal legacy was being redirected step by step, not through a single large action that would attract attention, but through a series of small adjustments. Each adjustment appeared lawful, but when assembled together, they formed a clear path leading away from the monarchy. The numbers made it impossible for Anne to remain still. Even in the preparation phase, hundreds of millions of pounds had been planned for reallocation. If not stopped, this money would leave royal control without leaving any direct trace. Without the king's signature, Without approval from the Privy Council, everything was concealed behind complex legal structures. Anne instructed Edward to stop at the right moment, not to penetrate further in order to avoid legal risk. What they had was more than enough. She spent a long evening organizing all the evidence. By timeline, by personal connections, by money flow, no emotion, no speculation, only facts presented coldly. The meeting with Charles took place in a heavy atmosphere. Anne did not begin with reproach. She placed the files in front of the king. One by one, Charles read, and the more he read, the more somber his face became. What Anne said served only as guidance, that this was no longer a misunderstanding, that this was an unforgivable betrayal, not against him personally, but against the legacy of their mother. Charles did not argue. He did not ask questions, because every answer was already on the pages. Emails showed close coordination. Transactions showed prepared money flows. Plans showed ambition that was far from small. In that moment, Charles no longer saw Camilla as the wife who had stood beside him through 30 years of public storms. He saw a boundary that had been crossed. What caused Charles the greatest pain was not the scale of the plan. It was the cold patience behind it. This was not an impulsive act, not a decision made in anxiety for family security. It was a long-term strategy, built in advance, waiting for the right moment to be deployed. And that moment had nearly arrived. Anne emphasized that if action was not taken immediately, the royal family would lose control of the narrative. Once the money flow was complete, once the offshore entities were operating smoothly, reversal would become almost impossible. Charles understood this better than anyone. He had witnessed larger crises begin from small mistakes, left uncorrected. Silence stretched across the room. No one spoke further. But the decision had formed. Charles did not hesitate. He knew that any delay now would only deepen the damage, not only to assets, but to credibility, to the vow to protect the legacy that he had made to his mother. An investigation had exposed everything. There were no gray areas left, no excuses remaining. What followed was no longer about gathering evidence. It was about confrontation, a direct confrontation. For the final time, with the person who had placed him in the most painful position since ascending the throne, the final confrontation was approaching, and with it a fateful decision that would change the course of the monarchy forever. The decision to give Camilla one final chance did not come from hesitation. It came from a sense of responsibility. Charles understood that any action involving the position of the queen consort could not be made in an emotional state. He needed to hear directly, one last time, without intermediaries, without files. The meeting was arranged discreetly. No ceremony, no secretaries, only Charles and Camilla, and what had been exposed could not be taken back. Charles opened with a direct question. He placed all the evidence on the table. No further explanation, no interpretation. Camilla saw the emails, the money flow diagrams, the trial transaction records. Her first reaction was denial. She said it was only coincidence, that the documents were misunderstood, that she had never intended to harm the monarchy. But the denial did not last. When Charles pointed to each detail, each timeline, each name, Camilla fell silent. After a long pause, Camilla admitted it, not with a clear confession, but with a sentence layered with meaning. She said she feared for the future of her family. She spoke of anxiety about being pushed aside, of the fragility of the position she had sacrificed her entire life to obtain. 30 years enduring harsh public judgment. 30 years living in the role of the third person. She believed she needed a guarantee, a way out, in case everything changed. Charles listened, but he found no true remorse there. He saw only personal fear placed above shared principle, and that was what he could not accept. He stated clearly that fear could not justify violating his mother's legacy. That legacy was not a reserve asset for anyone, even if that person was his wife. The meeting ended in silence. But Charles knew he could not decide alone. This was no longer a matter between husband and wife. He convened an emergency family meeting. Princess Anne and Prince William were invited. There were no media advisors present, no intent to negotiate, only to face the truth. In that meeting, Camilla could no longer maintain composure. As the evidence was presented again by Anne, as William questioned the long-term impact on the credibility of the monarchy, Camilla broke down in tears. She asked for forgiveness. She said she had never imagined things would go this far, that she only wanted to protect those she loved. But those tears could not obscure the nature of the issue. Anne remained cold. No attacks, no emotion. She repeated the words of Elizabeth II. That legacy must be protected from the closest temptations. William did not hide his firmness. For him, any action that threatened the integrity of the monarchy was intolerable, especially when it concerned the future of the next generation. Charles listened to everything. Then he spoke. His voice was low, slow. He did not need to raise it. He said Camilla had crossed a sacred boundary. The boundary between family and institution, between personal interest and historical responsibility. He announced his decision. Camilla would leave the palace. All privileges tied to the position of queen consort would be revoked. She would live separately at Highgrove. She would not take part in official activities. She would not intervene in any decisions related to royal assets or policy. Camilla stood frozen. She did not object. She understood there was nothing left to say. The decision was not made in anger. It was made with a frightening clarity. Charles did not mention love. He did not mention the past. He spoke only of responsibility. And that was what made the decision irreversible. The consequences followed immediately. Camilla lost all political and internal influence. From a queen consort once seen as powerful, she became a figure living in isolation. The title remained, but all doors of power were closed. No official schedule, no access to files, no voice in extended family meetings. For Charles, this was the price to protect what he considered most sacred. The legacy of Elizabeth II, the integrity of the monarchy, and the fragile trust of the public. He knew the decision would cause controversy, but he also knew that inaction would be far more dangerous. The meeting ended in a heavy atmosphere. No one won, but a boundary was restored. From that moment, the story no longer revolved around Camilla. It became a warning that within the monarchy there are boundaries that cannot be crossed, not by fear, not by love, and the consequences that followed would be a costly lesson for anyone who believed legacy could be negotiated. When all decisions had been made and the doors of power were closed, the consequences began to surface quietly, but without mercy. Camilla withdrew from the center of royal life and lived in isolation at Highgrove. No official schedule, no representative role, no access to files or networks of influence that had sustained her for years. The title was retained as a minimal form of dignity, but in reality Camilla had no voice, no position, no ability to affect any royal decision. The repercussions extended beyond the palace. The Parker Bowles family suffered heavy losses. Commercial partnerships were quietly terminated. Partners once eager for the royal name quickly withdrew. Some art collections and cultural assets were forced onto the market to maintain cash flow. There was no official declaration of bankruptcy, but the financial world understood. The patronage door had closed, and when the glow faded, reality became harsher than any public criticism. On the other side, Charles found a rare sense of calm, not because of victory, but because he had done what he believed was right, fully protecting his mother's legacy, preserving the boundary between national property and personal interest. He did not need lengthy explanations to the public. What occurred internally was enough to reinforce his confidence in the decision. The unity between Charles, Anne, and William became clearer than ever. Not through words, but through consistent action, Anne continued her role as the silent guardian of the legacy. No display, no search for recognition. She did what she had done for many years, ensuring core values were not eroded by ambition. William observed everything with the clarity of an heir. For him, this was a living lesson about power, responsibility, and the price paid when boundaries are crossed. This story did not end with the fate of a queen consort. It revealed a rigid rule within the monarchy. Personal ambition cannot stand above family loyalty and sacred legacy. Elizabeth II spent her entire life building an institution grounded in discipline and self-restraint. She once said that legacy does not belong to the one who holds the greatest power. It belongs to those strong enough not to abuse it. In a world where power often walks alongside temptation, that lesson still holds its value. No plan is sophisticated enough to remain hidden forever. No personal reason is large enough to justify violating what is considered the soul of a dynasty. And when the truth is exposed, consequences always follow. Quietly, but irreversibly. Which side did you stand on in this story? Have you commented number 1 or number 2 yet? Share your thoughts below. Like if you support justice. Subscribe so you do not miss the next developments in these royal stories. Thank you for staying with us until the final moment.